everyone. As we move along in learning outcome number 2 of Module 9, we're going to be covering the histological layers of the digestive tract. The digestive tract is going to be formed by 4 major layers, which will include the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa. There are variations that will occur in the structure of these 4 layers along the digestive tract, and these variations are going to be related to the specific functions of each organ and region. And when we get to each specific organ, I will let you know which are these variations. So for now, we will just cover the main structures of each of those layers, starting with the mucosa, which is the most inner layer of the digestive tract. In other words, the one that is going to be closer to the lumen or to the area in which the food content is passing through. It is a type of a mucous membrane, which if you remember from A&P1, the mucous membranes will consist of a layer of loose connective tissue that's going to be covered by an epithelium that is going to be moistened by glandular secretions. And this mucosal epithelium, it may be simple or stratified, and this is going to depend on the location and the stresses that's going to be involved. Therefore, we can say that the oral cavity and the esophagus are going to be lined by a stratified squamous epithelium that's going to be able to resist the stress and the abrasions. And this makes sense, right? Since in these areas, there is going to be plenty of friction occurring. On the other hand, the stomach, the small intestine, and almost the entire large intestine, they will have a simple columnar epithelium that is going to be specialized for secretion and absorption. Therefore, it can't be made up of several cell layers, and this is why it is a simple epithelium. Now, the mucosa of the digestive tract is often going to be organized in these transverse longitudinal folds that are called plicae, as they resemble pleats. And these plicae, they will dramatically increase the surface area that's going to be available for absorption. In some regions of the digestive tract, these plicae, they're going to be permanent features that will involve both the mucosa and submucosa. And in other regions, the plicae, they're going to be temporary features that will disappear as the lumen fills and the surface stretches, as it occurs, for example, in the stomach. And when we get to the stomach, we will see how this will occur. In addition to the plicae, they can have the villi or microvilli that will also function to increase the surface area. Next, we have the submucosa, which is the layer of areolar tissue that surrounds the muscularis mucosae. And here we're going to have large blood vessels and lymphatics that are found in this layer. And in some regions of the digestive tract, the submucosa also contains these exocrine glands that will secrete buffers and enzymes into the lumen of the digestive tract. Now, along its outer margin, the submucosa will contain a network of nerve fibers and scattered neuron cell bodies. And this will constitute what we call the submucosal plexus that will innervate the mucosa. And as you can imagine, because we have some exocrine glands in this layer, the submucosal plexus will be important because it will either stimulate or inhibit the secretion of these exocrine glands. Next, we have what we call the muscularis externa, and like the name says, it will be made up of muscles. More specifically, it will be made up of smooth muscle fibers. And these fibers are going to be arranged in both circular and longitudinal layers. The inner layer encircles the lumen. Therefore, this will be your circular muscle layer. whereas the outer layer will contain muscle fibers that are going to be oriented parallel to the long axis of the tract, making up the longitudinal muscle layer. And contraction of these layers, they will alter the shape of the lumen, and it will move the epithelial pleats and the folds. And these movements are going to be coordinated primarily by neurons of another plexus, which is called the myenteric plexus. And this myenteric plexus is going to be located between these two muscle layers, therefore between the circular and the longitudinal muscle layer. Now, the parasympathetic stimulation of the myenteric plexus, it will increase the muscular tone and stimulate contraction, while the sympathetic stimulation will promote inhibition of the muscular activity and relaxation. And this can be a little bit confusing, as we usually think about the sympathetic subdivision as being the one that will act. But remember that the parasympathetic is the one that will be responsible for the rest and digest stimulus. Therefore, it will be the one that will be acting on the digestive system. At specific locations along the digestive tract, this layer will form sphincters or valves, and these are going to have thickened areas of circular smooth muscle layer that will constrict the lumen to restrict the flow of digestive material through the lumen. The last layer is what we call the serosa, which is going to be located along most regions of the digestive tract within the peritoneal cavity, and the muscularis externa is going to be covered by this serous membrane. However, there is no serosa that will be surrounding the muscularis externa of the oral cavity, of the pharynx, the esophagus, and the rectum. Instead, we're going to find this dense network of collagen fibers that's called the adventitia, which will firmly attach the digestive tract to the adjacent structures and wrap the muscularis externa. So again, the serosa will be replaced by the adventitia on the oral cavity, the pharynx, the esophagus, and the rectum. But everywhere else in the digestive tract, we will find the serosa as the last layer of the digestive tract. Food will leave the mouth when the tongue and the pharyngeal muscles propel it into the esophagus. And this act of swallowing, which is the last voluntary act until defecation, is an example of what we call propulsion, which mainly refers to the movement of food through the digestive tract. It includes both the voluntary process of swallowing and the involuntary process of peristalsis. So peristalsis will consist of this sequential alternating waves of contraction and relaxation of the alimentary wall smooth muscles, which will act to propel the food along the tract. These waves are also important because they will play a role in mixing the food with the digestive juices that are going to be secreted by the glands. And peristalsis, it can be so powerful that foods and liquids that you swallow enter your stomach even if you're standing on your head. In other words, even if you're standing upside down. So how does peristalsis occur? So remember that we have two muscle layers, the circular muscle layer and the longitudinal muscle layer. Now, during a peristaltic wave, the circular muscles, they're going to contract behind the digestive content. And then the longitudinal muscles contract next, shortening these adjacent segments. And a wave of contraction in the circular muscles then forces the material in the desired direction, which is towards the anus. And peristalsis occurs everywhere in our digestive tract. except for the small intestine and some of the regions of the large intestine, where in these regions it will undergo what we call segmentation. In segmentation, there's going to be movements that will churn and fragment the digestive materials, and basically it will be mixing the contents with the intestinal secretions. These movements primarily involve the circular muscle layer instead of both muscle layers. In addition, they do not produce a net movement in a particular direction because they just churn in that specific segment, as we see over here in this image. On this image, I have added the submucosal plexus over here on the submucosal layer and the myenteric plexus over here on the muscularis externa between the circular muscle layer and the longitudinal muscle layer. In addition, the walls of the digestive tract, they will contain a variety of sensors that help regulate the digestive functions. And these will include, for example, mechanoreceptors, chemoreceptors, and osmoreceptors, which are going to be capable of detecting mechanical, chemical, and osmotic stimuli, respectively. So, for example, these receptors, they can sense when the presence of food has caused the stomach to expand. So this would be an example of a mechanoreceptor. Whether the food particles have been sufficiently broken down, which is also a mechanoreceptor, and how much liquid is present, which can be an osmoreceptor, and the type of nutrient in the food, which can be lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins, which is going to be detected by the chemoreceptors. Stimulation of these receptors, they will provoke an appropriate reflex that furthers the process of digestion. And this may entail sending a message that will activate the glands that secrete digestive juices into the lumen, or this can send a signal to stimulate the muscles of the digestive tract, and therefore activating it to do either peristalsis or segmentation that will move the food along the intestinal tract. Now, the walls of the entire digestive tract are going to be embedded with the nerve plexus, such as the submucosal plexus and the myenteric plexus located right over here, which will interact with the central nervous system and other nerve plexus, either within the same digestive organ or in different ones. And these interactions, they will prompt several types of reflexes. For example, we have extrinsic nerve plexes that will plan long reflexes, which involve the central and the autonomic nervous systems, and they will work in response to stimuli from outside the digestive system. Now, the short reflexes, on the other hand, they're going to plan the intrinsic nerve plexes within the digestive tract. For example, the sight, the smell, and the taste of food will initiate long reflexes that begin with a sensory neuron delivering a signal to the medulla oblongata. And the response to the signal is to stimulate the cells in the stomach to begin secreting digestive juices in preparation for the incoming food. Now, in contrast, the food that will be going down the stomach will initiate these short reflexes that will cause the cells in the stomach wall to increase their secretion of the digestive juices. There are going to be a variety of hormones that are going to be involved in this digestive process. And the main digestive hormone of the stomach is what we call gastrin, which is going to be secreted in response to the presence of food. Now, gastrin will stimulate the secretion of gastric acid by the parietal cells, which are present in the stomach mucosa. Other GI hormones are going to be produced and act upon the gut, and its accessory organs. Now, hormones that are produced by the duodenum will include secretin, which stimulates a watery secretion of bicarbonate by the pancreas, cholecystokinin, which can be abbreviated as CCK, which does several things. It stimulates the secretion of the pancreatic enzymes and bile from the liver, and it also releases bile from the gallbladder. And then we have the gastric inhibitory peptide, which inhibits gastric secretion, like the name says. And by doing this, it slows gastric emptying and motility. Now, these GI hormones, they're secreted by specialized epithelial cells that are called endocrinocytes, which are going to be located in the mucosal epithelium of the stomach and small intestine. Now, these hormones then will enter the bloodstream, through which they can reach their target organs. Now, of course, there are several other hormones which we will talk when we get to the specific organs, but this is just for you to see how the hormones will be able to influence the digestive process.